we may think that EdTech is successful because of technology, but I think this is completely untrue. Technology is a tool that has, in a sense, given wings to something that we are able to do, and it can make it extremely effective. But that's all that the technology does, and let me explain what I mean. Let's take an example from outside education. Let's talk about translation. Let's talk about Google doing language translation. So I type in something in English, I click a button and I can get a translated version of it, or I type in something in a regional language and I can then read it in another language, and this is possible. Now, what is the magic behind it? We may think it is technology, but it's actually technology sitting on top of a lot of research on language and linguistics, and it is that research and expertise that technology is able to use to create an effective product for us. In the case of EdTech, that core knowledge or expertise is supposed to be educational research. So if there is extremely strong high quality educational research, EdTech, which consists of a lot of the programming, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, and even the other tools that are available like video and so on, can enhance this educational research that is available. But if the educational research is weak, if we do not have good questions in our assessments, it's very important to recognize that merely the use of these tools on top of that, whether it is video or artificial intelligence or being able to create an assessment where every child can participate in a test and the teacher can see the results, can actually create bad products. It can actually take something which was not well thought through and make it available much more widely and be used by a lot of people. So you will see consistently that when we look at what EdTech works, it turns out to be not the ones that use the best technology, but the ones that are based on the strongest core educational research. Historically, EdTech was traditionally pushed by people, by companies that were coming from the technology space, and typically that did not lead to the kind of change and transformation. Over a period of time, there has been a greater focus on companies focusing and groups focusing on the education side of it and using technology, and we believe that turns out to be far more effective, but I would emphasize that there's a long way to go. The tendency is often to focus on the technology part because that is more glamorous, that's more attractive, that's the one that catches our attention. But if there are two products, one of which is thoroughly researched how children learn fractions, and then uses technology to make that available to students, and the technology is good but not great, and the second product, which does not do any work on fractions, simply picks up the textbook and says, okay, I have questions here, I have exercises here, and then uses very fancy technology with that basic available textbook material, I would think that the product with the greater educational research would be far more effective, and a number of studies do show this. So that's the link between EdTech and learning and assessment, that EdTech has to be based on a strong foundation of the core education research, something that we called science of learning in another session on learning. Talking about EdTech in India, what are the kinds of examples of use? So I will consciously avoid talking of any products or naming any products. I will name MindSpark, which is a product that our company runs, mainly because we have data on that, and I will be sharing results of a study on the learning improvement that was found in the case of MindSpark. But I just want to say that I don't want to name any other products, and hence I'm just going to talk about the categories of use and say that EdTech has been used across a whole range of categories, and I'll express these in form of two groups. So for example, private versus public schools, and you have EdTech being used and being tried in both of them. You have EdTech for students and you have EdTech for teachers, and there are good examples of both. So, in the case of teachers, it is being used to provide them with resource materials, help them with planning, help them with communication tools and so on, and students, we can think of various examples. We have EdTech in areas like assessment, we have EdTech in areas like learning and across other areas that are used in schools. Another distinction I want to make is language versus other subjects including math. It turns out that a lot of the use turns out to be in language, specifically English. English learning has been one large category and maths has been a second category, though you do have it in other subjects also. Some EdTech has focused on school learning and use in school and use in classrooms, whereas more and more a lot of EdTech is also focusing on use in home. So, by children individually using tablets or mobile phones or computers, and that is the other one. So, use of different devices like computers, phones, tablets. So, if you look at these categories, you will find that almost all these boxes have products, and we are at the phase where a lot of these things are being tried. We are not yet at the phase where the usage of these products has been rigorously measured and evaluated, and we are able to say that this is working really well. We have that for a few categories, but not for many. So, I will refer you to some, so like I said, I do not want to name products, but there have been maps that have been created. I want to mention one that Central Square Foundation created as an EdTech map some years back, looking at the range of products and the type of products that exist. So, I am giving you a reference to that, and those can be found, but we do see extensive use and interest. There is of course more use in the private space because it is probably easier to start at scale, but there are a number of interesting experiments happening in the government scale also, and we are definitely seeing that maturity with some of the learnings, and I'll talk about those in terms of the use of EdTech in all these situations. What has been our experience with the use of EdTech that we can talk about? So, I am going to talk to you about the results from the evaluation. So, I am not going to talk about our product at all. You could look up about it afterwards, but I am going to talk about the results from an independent external evaluation of the use of our product MindSpark, and I will spend some time on that because I think the fact that you do this kind of an assessment is extremely important, that our use of something like EdTech is not based on a sense that this is the right thing to do or even a belief or a confidence that it's the right thing to do, but that could be the starting point, but eventually it is based on results that are actually shown and results that are and assessments that are well conducted to actually measure what is important. So, this was a paper that was conducted by JPAL, that is the Poverty Action Lab at MIT, which looked at the effect of learning using MindSpark. There were two studies. One has been on MindSpark centers, which were out of school centers in Delhi, and a similar study is now being conducted on MindSpark being used in government schools in Rajasthan. And some of the things I am telling you are not specific to MindSpark. It is kind of true for well designed EdTech products, though we do not have too many such studies. So, it is kind of useful to look at this. So, one of the things that a product like this, because you are using EdTech, the data is being collected on every child and every question and every activity that they do is, and you can see this in the graph, is that there is a huge heterogeneity in learning levels. That means that when you go to grade 8, it does not mean that the children are all at grade 8 or they even are all at grade 7 or at grade 6. In fact, as you can see in this graph, you can actually see that in grade 8, the levels were actually clustered between grade 2 and grade 6, and with the average level being somewhere at grade 4. So, this shows you the kind of gap that exists in learning. You can also see that the slope of the blue line, which is the way they should be learning, that means that from grade 6 to grade 7 you should be learning 1 year's of material, is actually much less. That means that they are learning much less in a year than they should. Another way of saying this is that they are falling behind as they go. Now, this is simply the use of EdTech has allowed this kind of data to be got as to what was the level of students when they were doing the program, as they started the program, compared to the level in which they were actually enrolled. The other thing that we see here is kind of complementary to what we just saw, which was how did EdTech work, or what was something which was like quite remarkable about EdTech that is not possible to do if you're not using technology. What we are seeing is that the system, so what you see in this graph is different grades, grade 6, 7, 8 and 9, and it actually, every single dot that you see in this graph represents a question that was actually asked, or an activity that was actually done in that session. So this is just one session, and you're seeing that children are getting questions, or the system is giving questions ranging from a wide range of abilities for the different children. So I have this child in grade 6, but there are some children in grade 6 who are getting questions of grade 2 level, because the system has determined that they are at that level. So very similar to the previous graph, that where the gap, children are at this level and I am able to actually give them something at their level. Children are at a different level, the child is just sitting next to the first child, but that child is being engaged at that level. So the ability to cater to a wide variety of levels in one 40-minute session, or whatever, in one session, is something that is a key advantage of EdTech in its ability to, we talk of adaptive learning, basically saying that I am able to meet the child where he is. And of course, the result that one gets from these studies show 2 to 2.5 time improvement in learning outcomes from math and Hindi. This is a very rigorous study because it's what you call a randomized control trial. That means that you are testing for a lot of situations where children don't have access to this program, and you're seeing that the impact is not because of some other factor, but you're trying to tease out the effect of the program itself. We have results around the world, and one of the important things I would emphasize is the question is not, is EdTech effective? The question is that once you can we get a good EdTech, and then is it effective? So I would never use any study like this to say that, okay, this study shows that all EdTech is good, or it shows that all EdTech is bad, and I think none of that is true. There are a number of studies that show that the particular EdTech that was assessed in that study was not effective, and other studies that showed that the particular EdTech was effective. Some programs have looked at the use of feature phones, which is not even smartphones, to help children learn English, or adults learn English by giving them one sentence in English every day. And some studies which have found that that was effective. But why was it effective? Not because EdTech was used, but because the design of that entire program was effective, and that level of depth and understanding. So the question is not, is EdTech effective? The question is that can we carefully design a program that is effective and make modifications even as that program goes year on year to make it more effective by focusing on the parts that are working and removing the parts that are not working so well. So that was an example of how, it's an example both of how EdTech can be effective, and also the need to always have these kind of external assessments to know that the program that we are doing is working and what part of it is working. I would also say that the effectiveness that these programs have shown is definitely an improvement. It shows that we are on the right track, but it's definitely a long way to go. So it's not that we are at a stage today where EdTech can really ensure that every child is learning well. It's at a stage where it is working in the right direction, and we need to improve not just the EdTech component of it, but the base educational research component of it. Okay, what are the challenges that are coming in the way, and are the things that have to be overcome for EdTech in Indian schools to work well? And I think this is a very, very important point, and in a way I am sharing the learnings that we have had in doing all these programs. Remember that EdTech can cover assessment programs. I haven't talked too much about it, but there can be an entire program that we have a program, for example, that simply gives one question every day, but it's a question that has been very carefully developed. We have data on it, gets children to think, and it is just one question every day, available for free. Children can see it on a mobile phone or on a computer. And that is interesting because it gets children to think about that, participate, they can actually answer the question, and so on. So you have a whole range of EdTech opportunities, but what are the learnings that we have and what are the challenges that one faces? So the first challenge that I would see or I would talk about, and it's for all stakeholders, is there are two dimensions of it. One of them I would call effectiveness versus attractiveness, and the other dimension of it is engagement of the student and the teacher. So the goal of an EdTech is to be effective. The goal is not to be attractive. And suppose you have to choose an EdTech product and you see a presentation and you decide based on 1 hour of that, there's a risk that you kind of take that decision based on the attractiveness of that product. Whereas effectiveness means studies that show that over a period of time this has actually worked. And it need not be a study somebody else did. It could be a program that you pilot in your school for a while. And when I say a while, I would say it should be at least a few weeks if you want to know about this. Of course, if you've heard from other schools and so you are doing it for a shorter period, it's fine. But that is effectiveness. It's probably even longer. So is my program really effective? Even as an EdTech developer, for EdTech developers, do I make my program effective or do I make my program attractive? Obviously, I would like to make it both. But this balance is important because sometimes you have to choose and you have to allocate resources to achieve one of them. Related to attractiveness is this issue of engagement. So EdTech product has to be engaging to children, and this engagement leads to usage, which leads to benefits. Now, engagement does not necessarily mean visual attractiveness, and this is something that we have seen. Often the most engaging thing for children is something that is at their level, but there could be elements of visual and design and other things that work for children. So engagement is important, but it's not a substitute for effectiveness. The final test is effectiveness, but if you don't have engagement or if it's not attractive at all, it's very likely that the few students who do the program, you will find that it's effective, but enough did not do the program because they did not get engaged with it. So both the things are important, and it's a balance that has to be struck. A second experience that has often been found is that it's important for teachers that the EdTech program coordinate with their curriculum. So if I am teaching something in the class, whatever method I'm using, if I am using something for presenting, good, it's kind of easier for me to coordinate, but then the material I have must match what I was going to teach. So this is something that is important for teachers and for schools, and it has to be kept in mind while designing these programs. Software versus hardware. This is often for policymakers and decision makers, not just policymakers, but even a school principal, that often the focus is, and this is more of a problem, I would say, in larger systems, government systems, where the tendency, and this is not only in India, but I've seen this around the world, the tendency is to focus a lot of attention on hardware and getting that right, maybe because of a sense that the cost is there, maybe because of a sense that software is easy to get, it's freely available, or there are lots of options. I would say that a lot of care has to be exercised in selecting the right software. So, and there are open education resources that you can use for free. There are other things that you will have to buy and use, and you need to make those choices based again on effectiveness. But the key thing is to recognize that your program is going to succeed invariably because of the software and not because of the hardware, which is more like a base thing. So though you see the computers, the software that you may not see day in and day out, but the children use or the teachers use is very important to get right. Another important point that I've already mentioned, so I won't talk too much about it, is external assessment, or at least a formal process of assessment to check about effectiveness. And probably the biggest learning that I have personally had is the human role even in EdTech programs. So somewhere there is a vision, there is a feeling that the goal of EdTech is to replace the teacher, or that the goal of EdTech is that my program will be so good that children can learn by themselves without teachers. I find it ironic that we don't say this kind of a thing for medicine. So in medicine also you have technology, you have very advanced technology doing whatever we do, whether it's CAT scans or X-rays or diagnosis or everything. But we never talk about the technology working without the doctor. We always talk about the technology helping the doctor, and that is something which in education you do hear. In fact, I recently was reading about the X Prize, and I was there at one of the events where they have actually put together a group that's working on it. Now the goal of the X Prize is to develop tablet based learning programs that will work without the teacher, and we need to see what happens, and we hope that program goes well and we get a lot of learning from it. But our learning was that the human role is critical, and that, to give you an example, children, small children, if they hear a story from an adult versus they hear the same story from a computer program, and there are studies that show that the neurological impact and what children get out of it is significant when it comes from an adult. So a human being. So the human connect is something which is critical, and these two need to be blended. Some people call it blended learning. Other people say obviously it has to be blended, that is, you have the technology component, but you also have the human component. When we were running our centers, we also found that students learn better when they feel that there's an adult who cares about them and their learning. So I don't know how else to put it, but that is critical. Children also valued the connections with their peers. Once a month, when they would be taken on a trip to a picnic or a Qutub Minar in Delhi, we were based in Delhi, these actually helped in their learning. So these were some things which were not so obvious and somewhat counterintuitive, but we found that was a big learning. And when we did these things well, the core learning, which was the math and the language, which was actually being done with the system, with the computer, actually happened better. Finally, how can EdTech be leveraged to resolve the challenges to different stakeholders in education? So I would basically say that we should think like in other sectors. So if you look at a sector like airlines and you say, where are airlines using technology? And the answer probably is everywhere. I mean, whether it's the booking of the ticket or in the flight itself or the way that you do your boarding, wherever you can to make that process better, you would use technology. So in the same way, the stakeholders we talked about, technology should be used, and a lot of this will happen through innovation. So we should be open. We should not say that technology is only for teachers, we will not do it for children, or we do not need it for this. There is a time and a place and an effectiveness of each of these components. So that is there. I would strongly say that internet being available to schools is something that is useful and should be done with certain checks and balances, but anything at the policy level that encourages this. Some of the ideas that we have seen and recommended has been that schools can take internet from any provider, but up to a certain level defined by, say, the number of students, it actually gets reimbursed from the government. So if possible, ideas like this. And the last point, which I think is important, is for countries like India, a key challenge is what we call foundational learning, ensuring that every child is reading well by grade 3 or 4, ensuring that every child is able to do basic math in all its forms by grade, just that's foundational learning. The philosophy is that if you can do this much, then at least the child is enabled to work through middle school that may not be so effective, they can access resources, versus if they don't have these skills and then you give them a very good material and resources and teachers, but they have not learned to read effectively, and you can't learn some of these things after the window is gone. So can I focus, first of all saying that foundational learning is a focus for us and it's a national goal, but secondly saying EdTech for this use. So it so happens that EdTech can be extremely effective in getting children to read. It can be extremely effective in getting them to learn subtraction and multiplication, because these are more procedural, and if you do these things right and you do them repeatedly, then you actually develop that. So EdTech is suited for it. These are important goals, but actually stating this, kind of pushing for that, is something that can make a huge difference at a national level. So to summarize, EdTech can be a powerful tool in making a difference in learning in all aspects of education, but we should not focus too much on the technology part of it. EdTech is successful based on a strong grounding in education and educational research. We need to be skeptical about the effectiveness of specific programs, not skeptical in the sense saying they are not effective, but skeptical in the sense that we examine it, look at the effectiveness and go based on what data shows. And EdTech can be especially effective in achieving foundational learning, which can be a game changer for countries like India.